Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray, your weekly fix of ancient warfare-related ranting and raving. If you saw last week, absolutely lots of ranting and raving in there, probably some more coming up. What I do here is I attempt to answer a question from a reader, viewer, or listener. You can ask me a question by sending me a postcard, an email, commenting on a previous video or podcast, sending an email to anyone else at Carvanserai, and that will get its way to me, or indeed to Angus at the History Network. So this question comes from Tim, who is responding to an earlier answer. Oh, this is my 200th Ancient Warfare Answers. Oh, I just remembered that. 200 of them. So if you want to, you can almost listen to me for 38 hours straight, I think. Is that right? I'm aiming to get to 365 of these. So I'm over halfway, so that you could basically listen to one a day for an entire year if you wanted to. If you really need to have a Murray fix, who knows? Anyway, sorry, I get distracted. Tim asks, in response to the podcast on the Athenian Archers that I did a few episodes ago, it would be interesting to hear of the effectiveness of the archers. In wargaming, Cretan archers are usually considered as better than other archers, similar to Belearic slingers. Was this actually true or just a wargaming tradition? Okay. Did I get through all of that? You can, of course, back us on Patreon, one of 3 different levels, Legionary, Optio, and Centurion. You can, yes, ask a question however you like. Cretan archers are a fascinating field for me. So I don't know if you follow on academia. I think it's coming up 10 years ago now. Gosh, that's craziness. 10 years ago, I published an article on my academia site. Just search for my name. You'll Be an Archer, My Son, the Ubiquity of the Cretan Archer in Ancient Warfare. It was 4,190 words long. Since then, in the previous decade, and what I do is generally each year I save a new version of it. So the 2022 version stops at a certain point and then gets added to in the 2023 version. The 2026 version of that same paper is 39,000 words long, which is basically just exploring Cretan archers. I think, and this is a view that several scholars on Cretan warfare have challenged, I think that Cretans are the mercenary archers of the classical 5th and 4th century world par excellence, and that they excel at that skill into the Roman Empire, and they are being hired by Roman generals later, and even into the imperial period of the Roman Empire, where you get Cretan archer units in the auxilia. But more of that anon. The interesting thing about them is that they are mentioned very early. I think Pausanias mentions them being hired by the Spartans in the Second Messenian War, which is far too early for most people, saying that's not a time where they would have been hired. I think I mentioned before that Herodotus says specifically that the Cretans did not send any assistance during the Greco-Persian Wars. And Ctesias says, no, they did send help to Salamis. So he contradicts Herodotus. Later, especially from the Peloponnesian War onwards, we get more evidence of these Cretan archers being hired by Athens, for instance. And in the Sicilian expedition, let me just look it up. Have I written it? No, I've typed it as a number. Let me search up my own document. In what we get is the specific number of archers that are sent on the Sicilian expedition in Thucydides, Book 6, Chapter 25. Sorry, Book 6, Chapter 43. He tells us that of the 480 archers that were sent, which is, 1/3 of the Athenian contingent, 80 of them are Cretan. Now, 80 Cretan archers seems a very small number of archers to bother mentioning by name and to single them out. Now, coming back to your idea that they were considered superior, that's one explanation for why such a small number of specifically Cretan archers are mentioned. Now, these would be mercenary Cretan archers hired under, as I said in the last one, under Simoikoi agreements, where those 80 archers, presumably the entire unit, which is hired by Athens from a particular Greek city, a particular Cretan city. That Cretan city is obliged to provide that 80 archers for a certain length of time, a year, 2 years, maybe even longer. And so any casualties to that 80 would be resupplied by the Cretan city because they've been paid in advance for that unit. Now, what seems to happen is the city is contracted and paid an agreed fee. And this seems to be something that they're paid in advance. We will pay you X amount. You will provide us with these soldiers. The soldiers then are paid whatever they agree to from the city itself. So the city could be making profit on its Simikoi agreement. The other thing that's really fascinating about these Simikoi agreements is that it would seem that some of the Cretan cities are padding out their units of archers with non-citizens of their city, just getting anyone from anywhere. And so these Simikoi contracts, which again are from 3rd and 2nd century, specify that at least 50% of the agreed number have to be a citizen of the city that they're hiring from. You can't just pad it out with anybody. And one of the reasons for that is that going to Plato's Laws, he talks about how the training of Cretan youth is all about their ability with archery, javelins, running, and horse riding. And so there seems to be an idea that the Cretans were very good at those 4 things. There's also some evidence that they were absolutely up for any task. There's some evidence in Alexander the Great of him choosing Cretan mercenaries to do some quite nasty jobs, which they did without qualm. And there's several stories about that and assassinations and things like that by various different Nabis, for instance, the tyrant of Sparta later on in the late 3rd century. Anyway, coming back to Cretan archers, and part of this 39,000 word book that's not published is the idea that these Cretan archer units, 200, 500, are, and they're often around that number, 150, 200, 300. Not often huge numbers. 500, I think, is the sort of the biggest one we get. And that they are deliberately hired for their prowess with archery. And they are mentioned alongside other archers who are not specified as being from anywhere specific, which again implies that why would you single out Cretans in that case unless they're better or unless there's some kind of status in having hired Cretans. And as I said in that last one about Athenian archery, sometimes you get Cretan archers on both sides in a battle fighting against other Cretans, generally in an extension of civil wars on the island of Crete. Now, the other thing about why would I say that these are superior archers is that in Xenophon, we get the idea that these archers have shields, which is very unusual and normally not something, certainly in wargaming, that an archer can have as a shield. And there's several reconstructions of how they might have had a shield. There are several pots from around the Mediterranean that have archers with aspis or large round shields. And, you know, the porpax of a hoplite shield would allow, if you hold it with your forearm, you have your arm free if you need to. So you could operate a bow with that, which may be something that sets them apart from other archers who are not shielded. As far as I know, no other archer ever is described as shielded, just these Cretans. But what we do find is that the Cretan archers are stationed on the flanks of the phalanx in later warfare, which means they're in the front line protecting that flank, which implies that they are actually there to be able to be in the front rank. They're not unarmored or vulnerable in the same way as other archers. And we do have some evidence of Cretan archer units being charged and even resisting charges by enemy units, which again is not something we normally think about for archery units. Normally they're behind heavy infantry firing over them, or they are on the flanks and they flee quickly when they need to get away from enemy units who approach them too closely. So it's a really interesting thing. I think there's also, and this is me, ranting and raving again, one of the maneuvers of the phalanx described by the Tactica manuals. You have the Spartan countermarch, the chorus countermarch, and the Persian. So there's three names. Sorry, there's three names for one of them: Persian, chorus, and Cretan countermarch. Now, why is there a countermarch named after the Cretans? And I wonder, and this is right out there on that precipice of speculation, I wonder whether there's something in what in the late 15th century becomes volley fire, that there's some kind of rotational Cretan countermarch which allows them to fire their arrows, march to the front, fire their arrows, and essentially keep up a continuous rate of fire. Anyway, that is me speculating madly and wildly. So I hope, Jack, that answers your question. Have I missed anything else? Sorry, Tim, not Jack. Jack was last time. That was about the Huns. Also archers, right. The effectiveness of archers wargaming considered better. I think they are better. And like many of the named units, whether it be Belearic or Rhodian slingers, Numidian light cavalry and things like that, that when a culture has a name attached to it associated with a particular fighting style, that's a sure sign that they're better at it than anyone else. And there's certainly, I think, enough evidence to say that the Cretans become specialist archers, mercenary archers for the rest of Greece and Rome and elsewhere. There's, mercenary archers on Sicily as well in the 3rd, 4th, and 2nd century BC. I hope that answers. And you join me again for another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers. Thanks. Bye.